close because what I am about to say is not comfortable. It is not sanitized, and it is absolutely not what the mainstream wants you to hear, because right now, the XRP market is whispering before it screams, and one holder's take cuts through the noise like a blade, asking a question that should make every serious investor pause and say, WTF is really happening behind the scenes. Because while headlines distract you with memes and panic, the real signals are flashing quietly. The SEC is posturing, BlackRock is circling liquidity like a predator, the IMF keeps talking about cross-border rails without naming names, and Ripple sits at the center of a storm that feels engineered, deliberate, and dangerously misunderstood. And here is the uncomfortable truth from someone who actually holds XRP through the fear and the boredom and the disbelief. The market is not reacting to news. The market is being conditioned. Liquidity is being trained. Sentiment is being harvested. And if you think that is dramatic, then ask yourself why institutions talk about tokenization, settlement, and real-world assets in one breath while retail is told nothing is happening in the next. This changes everything because it reframes every dip, every delay, every so-called setback as potential positioning, not failure. And before we go any further, if you value information that challenges narratives and doesn't insult your intelligence, then make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and stay with this channel, because what comes next is not financial advice. It is pattern recognition from someone watching the chessboard while others stare at the pieces. And as we set the stage, understand this is not about price today or tomorrow. It is about why long-term holders are reading signals in regulatory theater, institutional language, and market structure that suggest something big is being prepared while the public is kept calm, confused, and late. So take a breath, lock in, and ask yourself, are you early to the most misunderstood asset in crypto, or are you exactly where they want you to be right now? Here is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for critics, because data does not care about feelings and authority does not ask permission. And when one XRP holder looks at recent developments, they are not staring at price candles like amateurs. They are tracking regulatory language shifts, institutional pilot programs, and settlement infrastructure hints that most people scroll past, because while the SEC plays its public villain role, behind closed doors, the tone has softened, timelines have stretched, and enforcement has quietly given way to framework discussion. And that is not speculation. That is observable in how regulators speak now versus 2 years ago. Meanwhile, Ripple executives are not doing hype tours. They are sitting in rooms with central banks, IMF affiliates, BIS-level discussions, and payment giants who do not waste time on assets they think are dead. Ask yourself why BlackRock publicly obsesses over tokenization and on-chain settlement while XRP just happens to be optimized for speed, liquidity, and compliance. Coincidence or convergence? Because this holder's take is simple and brutal. Institutions do not move loudly. They move legally, slowly, and in ways that bore retail investors out of their positions. And the numbers support this when you see on-chain activity stabilizing instead of collapsing, when you see partnerships quietly maintained instead of canceled, and when you see Ripple expanding corridors while social media screams scam. This is classic accumulation psychology. And here is the extreme question no one wants to answer. If XRP were truly irrelevant, why would it still be discussed in policy circles? Why would it still be name-dropped indirectly in reports about cross-border efficiency? And why would former regulators suddenly speak more carefully about classification because authority leaves fingerprints even when it pretends to step away? And this holder understands something crucial, that markets move not on headlines but on readiness. And readiness is built when everyone is distracted arguing about whether something will ever happen, not noticing that the plumbing is already being installed. So when you hear nothing burger accusations and endless delay narratives, ask yourself who benefits from you losing patience right before infrastructure goes live, because that is how real money has always played this game. Now, this is where the weak hands get shaken and the strong conviction gets forged, because every cycle has a catalyst, and every catalyst is preceded by maximum disbelief. And this holder's take on recent developments cuts straight through the FUD like it is scripted, because think about how perfectly timed the negativity is. Every time XRP approaches a narrative shift, out comes recycled fear, SEC fear, delisting fear, utility never coming fear. Yet somehow Ripple keeps building, corridors keep expanding, pilots keep running, and the same institutions that publicly ignore XRP privately keep talking about liquidity solutions, settlement finality, and interoperability. So let's ask the extreme question nobody in crypto media dares to ask. What if the catalyst is not a single announcement, but a regulatory green light disguised as silence? Because when the SEC eventually steps back, clarifies, or simply stops obstructing, the narrative flips instantly from "is XRP dead" to "how did we miss this?" And the FUD defense here is ruthless. Scams do not survive decade-long scrutiny. Scams do not partner with banks. Scams do not sit in meetings with IMF-aligned entities. And scams do not get attacked this aggressively unless they threaten existing systems. And that is the part that makes people uncomfortable. XRP is not trying to replace a meme, it is challenging legacy settlement. And legacy settlement has friends in high places, so of course the messaging is distorted. Of course, timelines are dragged out, and of course, retail is psychologically exhausted because the real catalyst arrives when nobody believes anymore, when holders are mocked, and when the asset is written off as boring. That is when switches flip quietly, liquidity routes open, and narratives are rewritten overnight. And this holder's take is clear. The FUD is not random. It is friction, designed to slow you down while infrastructure catches up, and once it does, there is no rewind button. This is the moment where people get emotional, because price forces accountability, and this holder's take does not sugarcoat it. XRP's price is not a reflection of failure. It is a reflection of delay, suppression, and unresolved regulatory friction. And that distinction matters more than any chart pattern, because assets tied to infrastructure do not move like memes. They compress, they coil, and then they reprice violently when constraints are removed. So when people scoff at future valuations, ask them a brutal question. How do you price an asset designed for global liquidity when global liquidity is being restructured? Because if even a fraction of cross-border settlement, remittances, or tokenized value flows through rails Ripple has positioned itself around, the current valuation looks not conservative but absurdly misaligned. And here is the final warning this holder keeps repeating. Most people will not buy XRP when it is boring, legally messy, and socially unpopular. They will only want it after clarity, after institutions signal comfort, after price has already moved, and by then the risk profile flips completely, because upside becomes capped while downside protection disappears. And that is how retail historically loses, buying validation instead of positioning. So if you are waiting for perfect clarity, perfect headlines, and universal approval, understand that markets do not reward comfort. They reward foresight. And whether you agree with this holder or not, dismissing the convergence of regulation, institutional language, and infrastructure build-out is not skepticism. It is blindness, because the final warning is simple and harsh. When this resolves, it will resolve fast. Narratives will change overnight, and the same voices mocking XRP today will pretend they always believed, leaving latecomers asking how they missed what was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Honored viewers, this is where everything locks into place, because the conclusion is not about hype, it is about awareness. And one XRP holder's take on recent developments boils down to a single uncomfortable realization. Nothing about this market feels accidental anymore. The delays, the confusion, the regulatory theater, the endless boredom, all of it has served a purpose: to test patience, to filter conviction, and to keep the majority disengaged while infrastructure quietly matures. And when you step back and connect the dots between Ripple's persistence, the SEC's shifting posture, the IMF's obsession with efficient cross-border systems, and giants like BlackRock talking openly about tokenization and on-chain settlement, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. XRP is not fighting for attention, it is waiting for permission. And once that permission is either granted or simply implied through silence, the revaluation will not ask for consensus. It will happen whether people are ready or not. And this is the final extreme question you should sit with after this video ends. If the system truly is changing and legacy rails truly are being upgraded, would the asset designed for that transition look obvious before it happens, or painfully boring right up until the moment it explodes? Because history is brutal to those who need certainty before conviction, and generous only to those willing to think independently when narratives are hostile. So whether you hold XRP, hate it, or have ignored it completely, understand this. The market does not move when everyone agrees. It moves when reality forces agreement. And by the time that happens, the window for calm positioning is already closed. So stay sharp, stay curious, and remember, the loudest stories in crypto are rarely the most important ones.